Unfortunately, it hasn't had the impact on what we do nearly as much as it should. And you look and say, well, why? Well, partly because it was never, ever a document of the general public, of the citizenry. You know, the regional growth strategy was created by the wizards and witches, and it remained with them, you know, largely. The experts, or whatever it might be. I was a facilitator in the regional growth strategy process. I wasn't an elected official at that time. Still a real person. And I can remember going to one of the great public forums for public consultation. And I had a number of people who wanted to go to, so I took my car rather than going, as I would usually, by bike. And there were 5 of us in my car. When we got there, we doubled the audience. Yeah, this was one of the cumulative, Jesus, you know. I mean, most people didn't have a clue. You know, they didn't have a clue. They didn't really know what was going on with it at all. And that was one problem. The other problem is it's a high-level conceptual document, lots of good words in it, but it really isn't particularly vision or goal-oriented. It doesn't set a clear, concise vision that people can look at. But it is a lens, and it should be a lens in this region, and it should have become one already, but it has to become one of saying everything we do, every single decision, ought to be seen through the lens of the regional growth strategy.
Can I just ask you a question? I saw the document, and when you use the word lens, obviously it's a metaphor of some kind.
Yeah.
Do you mean focus, or do you mean a test? Or
yeah, a test.
What do you mean by that?
A test.
A test. Okay,
just to say, yeah, sure, and the language maybe should be clear. Just to say, is this consistent? Does this, in fact, tie in to the vision of local sustainability the regional growth strategy is trying to? And if it doesn't, sorry, it doesn't cut the mustard, go away. The regional growth strategy wasn't created in the current environment of climate change. It should have been, you know. I mean, in 1992, CRD, and I can remember again being involved in that to some degree, did a little thing on climate change and made some recommendations, you know, 16 years ago that you know, were gratefully accepted and put up there, you know, and never heard again. So actually, about last year. But the CRD wasn't in that environment. I think every one of you in this room probably knows just how huge problem climate change is. The consequences of, I think I mentioned in the paper, range from dire to essentially catastrophic, and you know, everything in between. You're probably aware of the fact that the IPCC estimates are very likely on the conservative side, because essentially the accepted way for modeling output makes some assumptions that are probably not nearly drastic enough. They make the assumption that if we get up to 580 parts per million of CO2, that's a 3-degree rise in temperature. 2 degrees is questionable whether we want to get by there. But there's actually a fair number of pretty well qualified climatologists now are saying, no, that's not a 3-degree rise, that's a 6-degree rise. And we're probably at about 400 parts per million now, somewhere in that range, and going pretty, you know, rising pretty rapidly. And the reason they're talking about that is the essential principles for modeling don't take into account some of the trigger results from reaching a certain level of temperature. One, they make the assumption that the oceans will continue to absorb the same amount of CO2 that they do now. That's not a valid assumption. There's already evidence that the oceans are becoming oversaturated. So that becomes a factor. They don't take into account sudden releases of methane from the permafrost and any number of other factors that the trigger effect of when you reach certain levels. So clearly, you know, we have a second lens that we ought to have in this region that whatever we do should go through the lens of climate change and say, does this action contribute to a local solution, to our part of the solution of that problem? And if it doesn't, it shouldn't happen. Plain and simple. And then there's a third thing that's mentioned in the regional growth strategy, but is not particularly highlighted. And that is the implications for the economy of this region in the future. You know, any economy, and by the way, I'm a capitalist. I might as well let you know that. I always have been. I am a capitalist who believes in a reasonable level of regulation of the economy. And I think the last 10 years, only about 12 examples, and certainly the last few weeks, have pointed out that that might be a somewhat sane approach. Self-regulatory, I think, fits about as well with human nature as do the principles of Karl Marx. Both of them have a kind of an ideal vision of the nobility of the savage. Somewhere in between probably works best. But anyhow, any economy, for it to work well and to grow in the future and be successful, is going to always need an ongoing flow of investments, of wealth, of skill, of talent. You have to have that. Like it or not, this region, in every other region around the world, is essentially in a competition. All urban areas are. And it's going to become probably more intense. Because everybody wants those things. And they're not in unlimited supply. You know, the days of, this is North America, we're the pros from Detroit. Those days are gone. Essentially, ain't there anymore. You know, we can't make the assumption that there is the North American advantage. So, you know, hopefully this competition is going to stay as a kind of friendly or peaceful competition, but it's there. So, you know, how do you ensure that your region is a winner in that competition? You know, how do you do that? Well, you have to look and you say, what are our economic advantages? What do we got? We're not particularly close to major markets here in that advantage. In some cases we are, but we have other disadvantages. Really try to tell me that we have a transportation advantage. The next time you sit at the BC ferries, I beg your pardon, plus reduced schedules? No, we don't. We're not a low-cost environment, and I don't think many people would very much like the race to the bottom that would be involved in creating one. So what have we got? We've got some infrastructure advantages, some education, technology sector, big parts of them, but they're probably not enough. The number one thing this place has is the quality of life and quality of place it offers. You know, we get written up in Condé Nast, you know, one of the nicest places in the world, so on and so forth. Read sometime a quote from Kipling when he was here, and he talked about this area as being a combination of the Himalayas and the Bay of Naples and on and on. It's a fabulous place. I mean, there's no question. It's a fabulous place. And that's why an awful lot of us are here. Well, if you had any brains in your head, in my mind, you would sit down and you would say, how am I going to build on that advantage? I'm a poker player. I love playing poker. You know, I've been dealt an ace. It's quality of life and quality of place. I'm not going to take that ace and throw it away and say, give me a 2, you know, or a 3. If we're going to do well in this economy, our number one thing is to take quality of life and quality of place and enhance it. And so we should have a third lens that says every single thing we do, we ought to be putting it through the lens of saying, does this enhance the quality of life and quality of place of this region? For the people who live here, but also for our economic future. And if the answer is no, then we shouldn't do it.